Human perception treats time as a smooth, continuous sequence. The TCGS-SEQUENTION framework identifies this as a structural illusion, a byproduct of how we interface with a reality that is not chronological. This reality, the territory, is a static, four-dimensional counterspace. It contains the whole content of all possible configurations simultaneously, requiring no ontic becoming and no moving present. The observable world, the map, is a three-dimensional shadow. It is created by a mathematical foliation, a geometric slice through the four-dimensional whole. Just as a contour line drawn across a jagged mountain range is inherently rough and fractured, the intersection of this slice with the counterspace is irregular and discontinuous. This jagged intersection is mediated by the consciousness filter, or operator K. K is a conditioning mechanism that maps the total counterspace content to an accessible subcontent for experience. It interpolates and regularizes the rough foliation structure, smoothing it into the phenomenological flow we call time. The roughness of the geometry is the ontological fact. The smoothness of temporal experience is strictly an experiential artifact. To separate the territory from the map, we look for invariants, quantities that remain stable across different foliation slices. These invariants are the observational signatures of singularities, the topologically protected features of the counterspace that anchor the physical world. Conversely, artifacts are foliation-dependent fluctuations. They arise from the interference mechanism, where the influences of multiple singularities overlap and superpose before they are registered on the three-dimensional shadow. In low-gradient regimes, where no single singularity dominates the landscape, this multi-source interference is at its peak. This creates the perception of inherent randomness, which is actually the noise of overlapping deterministic signals. Identifying the physical signatures of this inversion involves analyzing the data that remains stable across disparate scientific disciplines. We look for the specific markers that survive changes in representational gauge to see where the smooth map fails to capture the rough terrain. Geochemistry provides the first anchor. The analysis of impact spherules from the Chicxulub crater reveals a strict meta-rule for separating source properties from process signatures. Mass-independent isotopic signatures, forged in stars, survive all cooling paths as true invariants of the source. Mass-dependent signatures, however, vary with the specific rough path of the cooling process. The roughness of the foliation is recorded in the fractionation data. This geometric irregularity scales up to the geological timescale, which exhibits a quantifiable multifractal structure. This is measured via the CMPP, the Compound Multifractal Poisson process, a model for analyzing event distributions across multiple scales. Power law statistics in the fossil record and magnetic reversals show that geological history is geometrically rough. It does not follow the smooth, local progression expected from a continuous temporal process. In astrophysics, this roughness manifests at the A scale, a universal transition acceleration of approximately 1.2 times 10 to the minus 10 meters per second squared, determined by galactic kinematics. Below A scale, the system enters a low-gradient regime dominated by multi-source interference. The resulting artifacts are currently misidentified as the gravitational pull of dark matter. Since the four-dimensional counterspace is static and contains its full content simultaneously, energy cannot be a fuel that is consumed. Instead, it is a functional on-shadow observables, a quadratic measure of interactional accessibility, and the cost of admissible transitions. This aligns with Noether's theorem, which links continuous symmetries to conserved quantities. Energy conservation is a slice-invariant bookkeeping relation, valid only where the underlying geometry admits specific symmetries. Across cosmic and geological scales, what we perceive as a smooth flow of energy or time is an artifact of our mathematical mapping. The modern concept of time as a dimension began with Hermann Minkowski. He assimilated the temporal coordinate into a vector direction within a manifold, mistaking a representational index for a physical dimension of becoming. However, BSW and ADM formalisms in general relativity show that time is not a fundamental variable. The lapse function and many-fingered time are gauge choices, not properties of the territory. This allows us to re-examine LHCb measurements of CP violation in baryon decays. Temporal irreversibility is revealed as static geometric chirality, a torsion within the 4D counterspace projected onto the 3D shadow. It also dissolves the paradox of retrocausality. Apparent backward-in-time causation is handled by the K-kernel, a non-local integral operator supported across different foliation slices that connects configurations atemporally. The offer and confirmation waves in quantum mechanics are simply bidirectional parameterizations of a single, static 4D structure. They are two ways of reading the same page, not signals moving through time. This exact geometric consistency explains quantum complementarity through the cartographic exclusion principle. Mutually exclusive wave and particle descriptions coexist without tension in the four-dimensional bulk. The contradiction only arises when they are projected as simultaneous three-dimensional shadows. The Zhang recoiling slit experiment demonstrates this by tuning A to F, the effective recoil parameter characterizing the overlap of vibrational states. Modulating this parameter is simply adjusting the rigidity of the 4D projection onto the map. Relativity and quantum mechanics do not describe an evolution through time, but the rigid geometric rules of a higher dimensional projection. Biological evolution follows this same atemporal logic. The E. coli long-term evolution experiment provides evidence for synchronous parallel emergence through a strict three-gate protocol. Statistical analysis shows synchronized mutations across 12 isolated populations. This is not 3D communication, but the coordinated disclosure of shared 4D geometric corridors as the populations traverse the same pre-configured landscape. At the macroscopic scale, starling flocks exhibit scale-free velocity correlations. A trajectory change in one bird correlates with the entire flock instantly, regardless of distance. These correlations propagate faster than any 3D signal. The birds are co-projecting from a unified 4D informational potential, coupled atemporally by the K-kernel. We see this intelligence again in the slime mold Physarum polycephalum, which solves maze navigation and network optimization without a central nervous system. This network optimization is the result of deterministic nonlinear dynamics. The mold's behavior is driven by geometric constraints, requiring no temporal planning or chronological processing. The human brain reveals the final layer of this projection. Readiness potentials fire 350 milliseconds before we decide to act, and fMRI patterns can decode motor decisions up to 10 seconds before conscious awareness. This 10-second gap is not a causal delay. It represents the rough edges of a static 4D structure intersecting the brain's foliation at different depths. We perceive the results at different times because they reside at different geometric coordinates. The unified experience of deciding now is a construction of the filter, smoothing over the multi-scale recruitment of the neural architecture. If the four-dimensional counterspace is static and pre-configured, we must redefine what it means to take a physical action. Action is governed by corridor geometry. This is the set of admissible transitions in the shadow manifold, bounded by the invariant backbone of the counterspace. Physical freedom on the shadow map is technically limited to selecting among these structurally consistent macroscopic routes. In low-gradient regimes, corridor switching is suppressed. Because many candidate continuations amplify artifacts and become unstable, the macroscopic route appears entirely predetermined. At high-gradient bifurcations, corridor branching reopens. These points allow for macro changes and a greater combinatorial freedom of navigation. This determinism does not eliminate choice. It defines the geometric boundaries of what is admissible within the shadow. If the body is navigating a pre-configured architecture, we are left with the central question of where the human subject actually resides. This framework distinguishes the mind from the consciousness filter. The mind is the true experiencer, and it is permanently located at the level of the four-dimensional counterspace. Consciousness is the filtering operator, the lens that determines which specific slice of the 4D content is accessed by the mind at any given moment. Genuine free will is not the power to violate physical constraints in the three-dimensional shadow. The shadow remains bounded by its geometric corridors. True freedom is exerted at the mind level. It is the control over attention, identification, and the weighting that determines how filtered content is integrated. Human existence is defined by the navigation of a static four-dimensional architecture through the pure focal point of attention.